On October 15, 1895, photographer Marcus Webb was hired by the Blackwood Workhouse in Lancaster, England, to record the good care given to children there. One picture showed two young brothers, Thomas and Edward Hartley, aged 11 and 8. Edward had his arms around his older brother in what looked like a warm hug. Marcus saved the photo as proof of the place's kindness. In 2019, 124 years later, digital restoration expert Dr. Sarah Chen was brought in to save old photos from Lancaster. When she zoomed in on the Hartley brothers' picture to 12,800%, something appeared in the pixels that made her feel sick. The hug was not about love, it was about fear. The small details hidden in the photo would uncover one of Victorian England's worst secrets. Before I tell you what the pixels showed, subscribe because this story will make you question everything you believed about old photos and the false stories institutions told. Thomas and Edward Hartley became orphans on March 3, 1895, when their mother, Catherine Hartley, died from tuberculosis in a Manchester slum. Their father had passed away 2 years before in a factory mishap, crushed by machines at the Ashton cotton mill. He worked long shifts there for just 8 shillings a week. Catherine fought hard to feed and house her sons. She took in washing and did sewing by candlelight, often skipping meals so Thomas and Edward could eat. By February 1895, Catherine could no longer work. She could hardly breathe. Her sister, Margaret Clark, came on March 2 and found her thin, burning with fever, and coughing blood into rags. "The boys," Catherine whispered, holding Margaret's hand with her last strength. "Promise me, don't send them to the workhouse. Please, anything but that." Margaret gave her word. But Margaret was married to a coal miner and already had 6 children in a tiny cottage. There was no room for Thomas and Edward, no money to feed 2 more mouths. Catherine died the next morning. Thomas held her hand as Edward cried into her blanket. They were 11 and 8, and they knew life was about to change forever. Margaret tried to find another way. She asked 3 other relatives, but they all said no. Times were tough. Families were big. 2 orphan boys were too much for anyone to take. "I'm sorry," Margaret told Thomas on March 8, tears running down her face. "I tried my best. The only place that will take you both is Blackwood Workhouse. But Thomas, listen. You must look after Edward. The stories I've heard about that place." She could not finish. "What stories?" Thomas asked, his face hard like a grown man's. "Just protect him no matter what." "Promise me." "I promise." The Blackwood Workhouse for the Poor stood on the edge of Burnley. It was a 3-story stone building that looked more like a jail than a charity home, and in many ways it was. The workhouse system was meant to give shelter and food to those with nothing. In truth, it was made to be so bad that people would do anything to stay out of it. The idea was that cruel conditions would push the poor to find jobs and stop depending on help. But Thomas and Edward were not adults who could get work. They were children, and Blackwood Workhouse, run by Mr. Harold Grimshaw, had a bad name for being harsh to kids. 3 people told Margaret not to send the boys there. Mrs. Porter, who ran the corner shop, pulled Margaret aside. "My cousin was a nurse there. She left after 3 months. She said she could not bear what they did to the children. Beatings for tiny mistakes, very little food, children forced to work 12 hours in the oak shed, pulling apart old rope until their fingers bled." Father Davies from St. Mary's Church visited Margaret at her home. "Please think again about Blackwood," he said. "There are other workhouses farther away that are not as bad. Grimshaw runs his place like a cruel king. Last year, 2 children died there. They said it was pneumonia and scarlet fever. But people whispered other things. Samuel Brooks, who brought coal to Blackwood, spoke plainly to Margaret. "Don't send those boys there unless you want them hurt or dead. I've seen kids carrying coal with bruises all over their arms and legs. I've heard cries from the punishment rooms. That place is not real Christian help. It's a house of pain with a Bible verse over the door." But Margaret had no other choice. No place would take both brothers. Splitting them seemed even worse than sending them together. On March 10, 1895, Thomas and Edward Hartley entered Blackwood Workhouse. The record in the Lancaster archives says, 2 male children, ages 11 and 8, orphans, no family able to care for them, sent to boys' wards, stay expected to be long. Neither boy ever left. 6 months after they arrived, Blackwood Workhouse got word that an inspector from the Poor Law Board would make a regular visit. Harold Grimshaw was angry. Inspections were meant to be surprise ones, but someone at the board, maybe that kind reformer George Lansbury, had started giving warnings so workhouses could get ready. Hide the bad things, clean the children, put on a show of good care. For 3 days before the inspector came on October 14, things at Blackwood changed a lot. The usual thin soup got real vegetables added. Children got extra water to wash. The oak shed where they worked for hours tearing old rope until their hands were ruined was shut for fixes. Most important, Grimshaw had the punishment room cleared out. Thomas Hartley was pulled from isolation. He had spent 72 hours there after taking a piece of bread for his brother. The nurse, Mrs. Abigail Stone, washed his face and looked at his arms. She took a quick breath. His forearms were covered in bruises, purple, yellow, green, at different healing stages. Marks like fingers showed where someone grabbed him hard. Longer marks from a cane. "Pull your sleeves down," she whispered fast, "all the way. Button them at the wrist. Don't roll them up tomorrow for any reason, do you understand?" Thomas nodded. His grey eyes looked him. 6 months in Blackwood had taught him to follow orders without question. Edward was in better shape physically. Thomas had taken beatings meant for his little brother, taking blame to save the 8-year-old. But Edward was broken inside. He spoke very little, jumped at quick moves, and had bad dreams that made him scream until Thomas held him. Inspector Martin Whitmore arrived at 10 on October 15th. He was a fair man who really cared about workhouse conditions, but he had too much work. He looked after 23 places across Lancashire. He had only 4 hours at Blackwood before his next train. Grimshaw showed him the cleanest rooms, the best-fed children, the newest things, everything set up like a play. "I'd like to record these good conditions for my report," Whitmore said. "Do you have a photographer?" Grimshaw smiled. "I've already set it up. Inspector Marcus Webb is ready in the hall." Marcus Webb waited in the big room. He was a local photographer who sometimes worked for places like this. He had taken pictures at Blackwood 3 years before, and those were used to get money from donors by showing how well things were run. Grimshaw picked 10 children who looked the healthiest and could be trusted not to cry or fall during the pictures. Thomas and Edward were chosen. They wore their cleanest clothes, hair brushed, faces washed. "You two," Grimshaw said, pointing at the brothers. "Stand together. Edward, put your arms around your brother. Show the inspector how children grow close here in our kind place." Edward looked at Thomas with scared eyes. Thomas gave a small nod. "It's okay. Just do what he says." Edward put his arms around Thomas's waist and pressed his face to his brother's chest. To Marcus Webb, looking through the camera, it looked like a gentle moment. A little brother finding comfort from his big brother. Marcus set the camera on its stand and got it ready. "Hold still. Don't move. The picture needs 8 seconds. Thomas stood stiff. Edward held on tight. Those 8 seconds saved more than Marcus Webb could see with his eyes. Dr. Sarah Chen had been fixing old photos for 12 years. But the Lancaster Historical Photograph Project was her biggest job yet. Paid for by the UK National Lottery Heritage Fund, it aimed to scan and fix 10,000 photos from Lancaster archives from 1850 to 1920. Sarah had worked on hundreds: factory workers, streets, family pictures, town events. On August 3, 2019, she opened file LHP 47, Blackwood Workhouse, October 1895, children in assembly hall, at normal size. It showed what the note said: orphan children in care, most in rows, faces blank. But one picture grabbed her right away. 2 boys, one bigger and one smaller, in a hug. The smaller boy's arms were around the bigger one, faces toward the camera. The label said, "Example of brotherly love kept in care." Something about the picture felt wrong to Sarah. She could not say exactly why. Just a feeling from years of studying faces in old photos, a skill to see expressions others miss. She started the fix. First clean dust and marks with special tools, then make contrast and sharpness better. The glass negative was in good shape, so high-detail scans brought out amazing clarity. Sarah zoomed to 400%, then 800%, then 1,600%, then 3,200%. She started seeing things that took her breath away. The older boy's hands at his sides were not calm. They shook, shown as a blur. Even in the 8-second picture, his fingers were tight, knuckles white. At 6,400%, the sleeves came clear. Dark spots at the cuffs, wrong color, wrong feel. Sarah knew from many Victorian photos what dried blood looked like. At 9,600%, she looked at the older boy's face. What she first saw as serious now looked different. Eyes too open, jaw too tight. The face of someone in pain trying hard to hide it. At 12,800%, the highest her tools could go, Sarah zoomed to the boy's left forearm, where the sleeve had slipped up a little, maybe half an inch during the shot. At the edge of the sleeve, pixel checks showed something awful. Bruises, dark marks, fingerprints, the clear shape of a hand holding flesh so hard it left marks. Sarah pushed away from her screen and ran to the bathroom, getting sick. When she came back, hands shaking, she made herself look at more of the photo the same careful way. The younger boy, pressed to his brother's chest, was tense too. Muscles in his neck and jaw were hard. His small hands gripped the uniform cloth with great force, and then she almost missed something. By changing the light and angle in her program, she saw a round mark on the older boy's neck, just above the collar, about 1 inch wide, the exact size and shape of a cane mark. Sarah looked at the records with the photo. The boys were named Thomas Hartley 11, Edward Hartley 8, brothers admitted March 1895. She checked the Blackwood Workhouse records. Thomas Hartley left December 1895. Reason: ran away at night, not found. Edward Hartley died November 21st, 1895. Cause: pneumonia. 6 weeks after the photo, the little boy was gone. Hands still shaking, Sarah called the Lancaster archives. "Hi. Story team. I need to talk to someone about Blackwood Workhouse," she said, voice not steady. "I think I found proof of child abuse, and I think it was covered up for 124 years. Her call started an investigation that took 6 researchers 8 months. Lancaster archives had many records from Blackwood: entry books, money records, death papers, letters, inspector notes. On paper, they showed a place that ran well and cared properly. But the hidden records, the ones filed wrong or kept secret, told another story. Dr. Robert Ashford, head archivist at Lancaster Archives, had worked with these papers for 30 years. When Sarah showed him the zoomed photo, he said right away, "I need to get the inquiry files." "What inquiry files?" Sarah asked. In 1896, there was a government look into conditions at several Lancaster workhouses, including Blackwood. Robert said it started from secret letters sent to George Lansbury, the social reformer. The look found nothing clear, but witness words were locked for 100 years. They opened in 1996. Few people checked them since. Robert got box 47J from locked storage. Inside were 100 pages of statements from the 1896 Lansbury inquiry. One stood out. Statement of Mrs. Abigail Stone, nurse at Blackwood Workhouse, February 12, 1896. "I can stay quiet no longer." The photo that Inspector Whitmore put in his October 1895 report shows 2 brothers, Thomas and Edward Hartley. That photo is false. Those boys were not cared for well. Thomas had been locked away for 3 days before the photo. He'd been beaten so bad I worried about inside hurt. Mr. Grimshaw told me to clean him and hide the bruises. Edward, the younger one, was always scared. He ate little. He had bad dreams every night. Thomas tried to protect him, taking beatings for him. When Edward died in November, the paper said pneumonia. That's part true. His lungs filled up, but the pneumonia came from hunger, cold, and the weak state of a child hurt over 8 months. Statement of Samuel Brooks, coal man, February 14, 1896. "I brought coal to Blackwood 2 times a week for 5 years. I saw things that made me ill, children with bruises, so thin you saw every rib. In September 1895, I saw a boy, maybe 10 or 11, moving coal in the shed. His hands bled. When I asked if he was okay, Mr. Grimshaw came and told me to stay out of it. That boy was gone a few months later. I learned his name was Thomas Hartley. He ran away in December. No one found him." Statement of Father Edward Davies, St. Mary's Church, February 18, 1896. "I did the funeral for Edward Hartley in November 1895. He was 8 and weighed about 40 pounds. at least 15 pounds too light for his age. The undertaker, Mr. Mills, showed me the body alone and pointed to heavy bruising on his back and legs. He said it did not match death from pneumonia only. I told the poor law board. Nothing happened. The worst was a letter found in Harold Grimshaw's own papers, dated October 20th, 1895, 5 days after the photo. The inspection went perfectly. Whitmore saw just what I wanted. The photos will help get funds. The board is happy. We can go back to normal. The Hartley boys made trouble during setup, but they got proper discipline. The younger one shows signs of sickness, but I think he'll get better or be gone soon enough. Edward died 1 month later. Thomas vanished 6 weeks after that. For 124 years, no one knew what happened to Thomas Hartley after he ran from Blackwood in December 1895. Then, in October 2019, 3 months after Sarah started her work, a woman named Margaret Preston called Lancaster Archives. I saw the news about the Blackwood photo. I think my great-great-grandfather might be one of those boys. Margaret's great-great-grandfather was named Thomas Hartley. He never talked about his early life except to say he was orphaned young and went through hard times before things got better. He changed his last name to Preston when he joined the army in 1900, maybe to avoid being sent back to care. Margaret gave photos of Thomas as an older man in the 1950s with grandchildren around him, smiling but with eyes that held long pain. Sarah compared the 1895 photo with later ones of Thomas Preston. Face match software, adjusted for growing old, gave a 94% match. Thomas Hartley had lived. He escaped Blackwood at 11 in winter and somehow got to Liverpool. A ship captain took him as a cabin boy. He spent his teen years at sea, joined the army at 16 by lying about age, and settled in Southampton as a dock worker. He married and had 4 children. He never spoke of Edward. His family did not know he had a brother. But Margaret found something in Thomas's things while looking into family history, a small leather notebook written in 1948 when Thomas was 64 and sick, needing to write the past. He wrote on March 15, 1948, "I am an old man now, and maybe the past should stay hidden. But I see Eddie's face every night when I shut my eyes. He was 8 and died because I could not save him. I promised Mom I would protect him. I promised Aunt Margaret I would protect him. I failed. Blackwood Workhouse killed my little brother as sure as if they stabbed him. They starved him, beat him, worked him until he fell. When he got sick, they let him die. I ran because I knew I was next. I was a coward. I left Eddie's grave. And I've carried that guilt for 53 years. If there is a God, I hope he punishes the men who ran that place. I hope they suffered like Eddie did." The notebook, with the photo, the statements, and Sarah's work on the picture, went to the UK Parliament's Historical Injustices Committee in March 2020. On November 21, 2020, exactly 125 years after Edward Hartley's death, Parliament passed the Historical Institutional Abuse Recognition and Remedies Act 2020, called the Hartley Act. The law did 3 main things. It set up a way to look into old cases of child abuse in institutions and give official sorry to victims. It made a national list of workhouse records, schools, and other places so researchers and family could find proof easier. It gave money for memorials and teaching programs to make sure victims are remembered. The law was not perfect. It could not bring Edward back, take away Thomas's pain, or punish the men who did wrong. But it was notice. It was saying sorry. The government finally said this happened, it was bad, we remember. On October 15, 2021, exactly 126 years after Marcus Webb took the photo, a memorial opened at the old Blackwood Workhouse site. The building was torn down in 1952, and the land became a small park in Burnley, with just one stone wall left from the old place. The memorial was a bronze statue of 2 boys, one older, one younger, standing together. The older boy's hand rested on the younger one's shoulder. Both looked to hear. D to a future they never had. The words on it said, "In memory of Edward Hartley, 1887 to 1895, and Thomas Hartley, 1884 to 1957, and all children who suffered in institutional care. Edward died here at age 8. Thomas lived but carried the hurt always. May we never forget. May we never do it again. Sarah Chen went to the opening with Margaret Preston and 3 of Thomas's great-great-grandchildren. Over 200 people came, historians, campaigners, family of other workhouse victims, locals and schoolkids who learned about the Hartley case in class. The photo, in its original form and the restored zoomed version, was shown on boards around the memorial. People could see the change, the image from 1895 hiding its truth, and the image now showing it clear. This photograph taught us something important, Sarah said at the ceremony. Old pictures are not just facts. They were made by people with plans, reasons, and often things to hide. The Victorian time left us thousands of photos of orphanages, workhouses, and homes, all showing neat children in tidy places. How many of those photos are false? How many hide hurt behind set smiles and forced hugs? The memorial gets about 5,000 visitors each year. Many leave flowers, white roses for Edward, red roses for Thomas. Some leave notes, "You deserve better. We remember you. This should never have happened again."